The elders of a village lost among the mountains tell that many years ago there lived a blacksmith named Esteban, a man with calloused hands and a generous heart, who had raised his 3 daughters alone after his wife's death. The girls were his only joy in this world. Catalina, the eldest, was clever and determined. Beatriz, the middle one, was dreamy and artistic, and little Lucia, quiet but observant, with a gaze that seemed to see beyond the obvious. The blacksmith loved them madly and never denied them anything, working from dawn until the sun hid behind the snowy peaks to give them everything they needed. The house where they lived was modest but cozy, with an attached workshop where Esteban's hammer constantly rang against the anvil, creating tools, horseshoes, and all kinds of iron objects that the village inhabitants needed. The 3 sisters grew up surrounded by their father's love and the warmth of the forge, learning from an early age to fend for themselves in household tasks while their father worked. One autumn day, when the leaves were beginning to turn golden and red, a messenger from the king arrived in the village with a proclamation. Expert blacksmiths were needed in the kingdom's capital to forge weapons and armor, as difficult times were approaching at the borders. The king offered a considerable sum of gold to whoever accepted the job, enough to secure an entire family's future. Esteban thought of his daughters, of the marriages he would need to arrange for them, of the dowries they would need, of the house they deserved. That opportunity was unique, but it meant being away from the village for at least 3 months, perhaps 4 if winter came early and closed the mountain passes. Anguish consumed him for days on end. How could he leave his 3 daughters alone in that house, far from the village center, at the edge of the dark forest that everyone avoided after nightfall? He had no close relatives to trust, and although the girls were already quite grown, they had never been alone for so long. For a whole week, Esteban couldn't sleep, tossing and turning in his bed while listening to the autumn wind beat against the wooden shutters. Finally, he made a decision. One morning, before dawn, he set out for the neighboring village's market, where animals of all kinds were traded. There, with the money he had saved for years, he acquired 4 creatures: a black cat with yellow eyes and shiny fur that the seller assured was the best mouse hunter in the entire region, an enormous mastiff dog with a powerful jaw and unwavering loyalty, who intimidated just by his presence, a red rooster with an imposing crest whose crow could wake the dead, and finally, a gray donkey, old but sturdy, who could help the girls with heavy loads if they needed it. When Esteban returned home with those animals, the girls received him with laughter and amazement. "Listen well," said the blacksmith in a grave voice, gathering his 3 daughters in the main room of the house while the animals watched from different corners. "I must leave tomorrow at dawn for the capital. I will be away for several months, but these friends I've brought you will take care of you in my place. The rooster will wake you every morning and alert you if anything strange happens. The donkey will help you with water from the well and with firewood. The dog will guard the entrance and no evil can cross while he lives. And the cat will hunt vermin and keep the house clean of pests." Esteban looked intently at each of his daughters before continuing. "I've filled the pantry with provisions for 4 complete months. Flour, dried legumes, salted meat, oil, honey, cured cheese. You'll lack nothing. But you must promise me something. Don't open the door to anyone, absolutely no one, no matter what they tell you or what they promise you. If you need something urgent, have one of you climb to the roof and call the miller's neighbor, Mrs. Rosario. She is trustworthy and will help you. I'll pay her generously when I return." The girls nodded, though with some apprehension on their faces. Little Lucia hugged her father tightly, as if sensing that something bad might happen. "Father," she whispered, "what if someone tries to hurt us?" Esteban knelt to be at his youngest daughter's height and stroked her brown hair. "That's why I'm leaving you the dog, little one. As long as he lives, nothing bad will happen to you. Trust in the animals. They perceive danger much sooner than we do." The next day, when the first lights of dawn were barely beginning to tint the sky pink and orange, Esteban kissed each of his daughters, gave them his blessing, and departed with a small backpack on his shoulder, walking along the path that led to the main road. The three sisters saw him off from the door, watching as their father's figure grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared around a bend in the road. The first days passed relatively normally. The sisters established a routine. Catalina, the eldest, was in charge of cooking. Beatriz took care of cleaning and mending clothes, and little Lucia fed the animals and drew water from the well with the donkey's help. The black cat, whom they named Shadow, proved to be indeed an exceptional hunter, bringing each morning some mouse or rat he had caught during the night. The rooster, baptized as Carmelo, religiously fulfilled his duty of waking them at dawn. The donkey, whom they called Grison, patient and calm, greatly facilitated heavy tasks. And the dog, whom they named Guardian, remained almost always lying in front of the main door, with his brown eyes always alert, watching every movement, every shadow, every sound that came from outside. But Shadow, the black cat, had a proud and sensitive character. One afternoon, approximately 2 weeks after Esteban's departure, Catalina was in the kitchen preparing a fish stew. She had gotten some fresh trout from the nearby stream and was cleaning them on the wooden table, removing the scales with a sharp knife. The smell of fish flooded the entire house, and Shadow, attracted by the smell, entered the kitchen with his elegant and silent gait, meowing softly while rubbing against Catalina's legs. "Not now, Shadow," said the girl without paying much attention, concentrated on her task. But the cat insisted, jumping on the table and dangerously approaching the trout. "Get out of here, damn animal," shouted Catalina, losing her patience, and took the broom that was leaning against the wall, hitting the cat on the back with more force than necessary. Shadow jumped from the table with a howl of pain and rage, his yellow eyes shining with a strange light in the kitchen's dimness. He remained motionless for a moment, staring fixedly at Catalina with an intensity that would have made anyone uncomfortable. "You'll see what's coming to you for this," his gaze seemed to say, though obviously he spoke no words. Then, with his tail bristled and his back arched, he ran out of the kitchen and disappeared into the shadows of the house's interior. Catalina didn't give much importance to the incident, thinking that the cat was simply angry and that it would pass soon. She continued with her dinner preparation, not suspecting the consequences that act of impatience would have. That night, while everyone slept, Shadow stealthily entered the small storeroom where they kept provisions and various household items. There, on a low shelf, was the tin box where they kept the matches, those small wooden sticks with phosphorus tips that they used to light the fire in the kitchen and fireplace. With deliberate malice, the cat urinated on the box, soaking it completely. The contents became damp immediately, and the matches were rendered useless, though this wouldn't be noticed until someone tried to use them. The next day in the afternoon, when it was time to prepare dinner, Catalina went to get the matches to light the fire in the iron stove. She took the box, opened it, and immediately wrinkled her nose at the strong smell of cat urine. "This can't be," she exclaimed, pulling out one match after another, all damp and useless. That damn cat ruined them all. She called her sisters to show them the disaster. Beatriz suggested that perhaps they could dry them in the sun, but Lucia, who examined the matches more closely, shook her head. "They're completely ruined. The phosphorus has dissolved with the moisture. They won't work even if we dry them. I'll have to climb to the roof to call Mrs. Rosario," said Catalina, remembering her father's instructions. She climbed the ladder to the red tile roof, from where the mill could be seen at a certain distance, and began shouting the neighbor's name. but there was no answer. The mill house seemed empty, with closed windows. Catalina shouted several more times, but no one responded. She came down discouraged and gathered her sisters. Mrs. Rosario isn't there. She probably went to the village. What do we do now? Father forbade us to open the door to anyone and to go out after nightfall. Beatriz proposed waiting until the next day, but the stomachs of all three were rumbling with hunger as they hadn't eaten anything hot all day. It was then that Carmelo, the red rooster, who had been listening from his perch in the henhouse attached to the house, crowed noisily. "Cock-a-doodle-doo, I see fire. Fire in the distance." The sisters looked at each other, confused. "Did the rooster speak?" asked Beatriz incredulously. "The animals that father brought us are not ordinary," murmured Lucia in a quiet voice. They looked out the window facing the forest and, indeed, in the distance, among the dark trees, an orange light shone, like from a bonfire or a lit lamp. If you want to know how this story continues and not miss the next tales from the channel, subscribe now and activate the bell. "We could go there and ask them to lend us a match or an ember," suggested Catalina. Lucia frowned. "Father told us not to go out after nightfall." But Catalina had already made a decision. "We won't go far, just to where that light is. It will be quick. Besides, we'll die of hunger if we don't cook something soon." Beatriz, always the most conciliatory, supported her older sister's idea. Lucia, despite her reservations, had no choice but to follow them. The three put on their wool capes, took an oil lantern, and left the house, followed at a certain distance by Guardian, the mastiff dog, who sensed the danger but couldn't disobey when his mistresses went out. They walked along the path that entered the forest, following the light that flickered between the trunks of the centuries-old trees. The night wind made the branches creak and the dry leaves whisper under their feet. Lucia walked, holding Beatriz's hand, constantly looking back, where Guardian followed them with a firm step. Finally, after about 20 minutes of walking, they arrived at a small clearing where stood a dilapidated cabin with dark wooden walls covered in moss and dirty windows. Smoke came from the chimney, and through the cracks in the door filtered the light of an interior fire. Catalina, the bravest, approached and knocked on the wooden door with her knuckles. Heavy footsteps were heard inside, and the door opened with a terrifying creak of rusty hinges. In the threshold appeared a hunched figure, wrapped in dark rags. It was a woman, or at least seemed to be, but she kept half her face hidden under a tattered hood. The only thing visible was a mouth with cracked lips and a hooked nose. "What do you want at this hour?" she asked in a harsh and unpleasant voice, like the scraping of stones. Catalina swallowed but maintained her composure. "Excuse me, ma'am. Our matches got ruined and we need fire to cook our dinner. Could you lend us an ember or a match?" The creature in the threshold remained motionless for a moment, as if evaluating the three girls in front of her. Then a crooked smile appeared on those cracked lips. "Of course, my girls. Come in, but you'll need a knife to cut a dry branch that you can carry lit. Wait here a moment." The woman disappeared inside the cabin. The sisters looked at each other uncomfortably. There was something deeply disturbing about that woman and that place. The smell emanating from the cabin was nauseating, a mixture of rotten meat and something indescribable. Lucia pulled on Catalina's sleeve. "Let's go, please. This isn't right." But before they could leave, the woman reappeared with a huge knife in her hand, a wide, stained blade that seemed to have cut many things besides branches. "Take it, girl," she said, handing the knife to Catalina with a smile that revealed yellowed, sharp teeth. "Cut whichever branch you want from that pile by the door." Catalina took the knife with trembling hands and approached the pile of firewood stacked next to the cabin entrance. She chose a good-sized dry branch and began to cut it. But the knife was so sharp and the wood so dry that the blade slipped too easily, cutting not only the branch but also Catalina's palm. "Ow!" the girl screamed, dropping the knife and bringing her wounded hand to her chest. Blood began to drip onto the earth. The woman from the cabin approached quickly, almost too quickly, and her hooked nose sniffed the air. "Blood, what a waste!" she exclaimed, but then composed an expression of false concern. "Poor thing. Wrap that wound and return home quickly before it gets infected." Beatriz tore a piece from her own shirt and quickly bandaged her sister's hand. They took the lit branch that the woman offered them with a long stick from inside the cabin, and the three sisters hurriedly started the way back without even thanking properly. Guardian, who had remained a few meters away during the entire encounter, growled threateningly toward the cabin before following his mistresses. During the return journey, small drops of blood from Catalina's wound fell to the ground, despite the improvised bandage. Guardian, instinctively, tried to erase those drops with his paws, spreading dirt over them, trying to hide the trail. But Shadow, the black cat who had followed them without anyone noticing, took advantage of every opportunity to step aside and scratch the dirt that Guardian had moved, leaving the drops of blood visible again. When they finally arrived home, Catalina cleaned and properly bandaged her wound with clean cloth and some alcohol her father kept for disinfecting. They lit the fire with the ember they had brought and cooked a quick dinner. They left some embers in the brazier to be able to light the fire the next day without needing matches. They ate in silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the strange encounter in the forest. Afterward, following their usual saving routine, they extinguished the candles early and went to sleep, not knowing that that night their destiny had begun to twist dangerously. What the girls didn't know was that that woman from the cabin was not a woman at all. It was an ogre, a creature from ancient legends that lived in the deepest part of the forest, feeding on lost animals and, when lucky, solitary travelers who ventured too far from the main roads. For decades, that monster had lived in the cabin, disguising itself when necessary to lure its victims. And that night, when the three sisters knocked on its door, its hungry eyes had seen a feast it couldn't pass up. Three young and well-fed girls, alone in a house with no protection other than a dog and a few domestic animals. It was too tempting, so that midnight, when the moon was high and the stars shone clearly in the clear sky, the ogre left its cabin. It followed the blood trail that Shadow had left visible, walking hunched over, with its long arms almost touching the ground, sniffing the air with that grotesque nose. Its eyes, which during the day seemed almost human, now shone with a greenish glow in the darkness. It carried a large sack on its back, already anticipating its bounty. When it arrived at the blacksmith's house, it stopped in front of the door and observed. All the windows were dark, a sign that their occupants were sleeping deeply. A horrible smile spread across its face as it began to sing in a hoarse and sinister voice. Three girls sleep well, plump as can be, as well, in a house of iron and coal. Tonight I'll eat the biggest piece of each one. But before it could approach further, an enormous figure rose from the shadows next to the door. It was Grison, the donkey, who had been resting there. Seeing the ogre, the donkey brayed loudly. "My master entrusted me to protect them. You won't touch them while I breathe." The ogre was surprised, as it didn't expect a simple donkey to speak to it, but quickly its surprise transformed into fury. A talking donkey? What a novelty. Well, you'll be my appetizer. Then, with surprising speed for its size, the ogre jumped on Grison, and although the brave donkey fought, kicking and biting, it was no match for the creature's supernatural strength. In a few minutes, the ogre had killed the donkey and devoured it almost completely, leaving barely some scattered bones. Momentarily satiated but still hungry for human flesh, the ogre returned to its cabin, planning to return the following night. The next morning, when Lucia went out to feed the animals, she discovered with horror the remains of Grison. Her screams alerted her sisters, who came running out. Guardian sniffed the bones and growled deeply, recognizing the ogre's smell. The sisters buried what remained of the poor donkey in the back garden, crying bitterly. "What could have done this?" sobbed Beatrice. "It was a bear, or maybe wolves," suggested Catalina, though in her heart she knew that no common animal would have left the bones that way. Only Lucia remained silent, remembering the forest cabin and the strange woman, beginning to connect dots that her sisters still didn't want to consider. The second night, the ogre returned. This time, it sang its song again. "Three girls sleep well, plump as can be, as well. In a house of iron and coal, tonight I'll eat the biggest piece of each one." Carmelo, the red rooster, who was in his hen house, heard the ogre's voice and jumped from his perch, flapping his wings and singing with all his strength. "Cock-a-doodle-doo! My master entrusted me to protect them. You'll never touch them." The ogre laughed wickedly. "Another talking animal. This place is full of surprises, but you're nothing more than a morsel." The rooster fought valiantly, pecking and scratching with his spurs, but he too was no match for the ogre. In a short time, Carmelo was devoured, feathers included. The ogre again withdrew, promising itself to return the following night to finally enjoy its true prize. On the third day, the sisters found Carmelo's bloodied feathers scattered around the yard. Fear began to settle in the house. They could no longer deny that something terrible was happening. Guardian spent the whole day vigilant by the door, barely eating, aware that he was the last line of defense between his mistresses and the evil that lurked. That third night, when the ogre appeared again and sang its horrifying song, Guardian launched himself against it with all his fury. The mastiff dog was large and strong, trained to fight, and the ogre found in him a formidable adversary. The battle was brutal and noisy. Guardian bit and tore, barking ferociously, while the ogre tried to grab him with its claws. The noise woke the sisters, who looked out terrified through the windows. They saw then, under the moonlight, the ogre's true form, a hunched creature, with greenish skin covered in warts, disproportionately long arms ending in claws, and that frightening face that was a nightmare made real. The battle seemed eternal, but finally, the ogre managed to gravely wound Guardian. The dog fell to the ground, bleeding, but even so tried to get up, growling weakly. "My master entrusted me to protect them." The ogre, wounded and exhausted itself too, decided to withdraw again. "I'll return," it promised before disappearing into the darkness. The sisters ran out and carried Guardian inside the house. The poor dog was gravely wounded, with deep claw wounds on his side. They did what they could to heal him, cleaning his wounds and bandaging them with clean cloths, but the animal was very weak. The next day, while Guardian rested inside trying to recover, there was a soft knock at the door. It was a woman's voice, sweet and kind. "Girls, are you there? I'm your Aunt Margarita. Your father asked me to visit you to make sure you're well. I bring fresh food and sweets from the village." The sisters looked at each other. "Aunt Margarita," murmured Beatrice. "Father never mentioned we had an aunt with that name." They looked through the crack in the door and saw a woman wrapped in clean clothes, with a basket in her hands from which emanated a delicious smell of freshly baked bread and ripe fruits. The woman had her face partially covered with a scarf, as was customary among country women when they traveled. Catalina, always the most impulsive, was about to open when Lucia grabbed her arm. "No," she said firmly. "Something isn't right. Why is she hiding her face? And how did she know we need food?" But Beatriz, tempted by the smell of fresh food, sided with Catalina. "Lucia, you're being paranoid. Obviously, father told her about us. And decent women always cover their faces when they travel." Besides, don't you see she brings food? I'm tired of eating only dried legumes and salted meat." From his corner, Guardian tried to get up, growling weakly, warning of the danger, but he was too weak. The voice outside continued, now with a more insistent tone. "Girls, I have honey cakes and fresh cheese. I also bring news of your father. Don't you want to know how he's doing?" That was enough to convince Catalina and Beatriz. "Lucia, don't be foolish. She's just a good woman that father sent to help us. And look at the dog. How are we going to protect ourselves with a dying animal? If she were dangerous, the dog wouldn't be in that state from something else." The twisted logic convinced even Lucia, though her instinct kept screaming at her that something was wrong. Finally, they opened the door. The woman entered with a smile that was too wide, leaving the basket on the kitchen table. "What a lovely house you have," she said, while her eyes, which shone with a strange gleam, scanned every corner. "I see you have a guard dog. What a shame he's so badly hurt. It must be very dangerous to have such a large and aggressive animal in the house, especially if it's suffering. Wounded animals can become unpredictable, you know." Guardian, gathering his last strength, barked weakly toward the woman, but she completely ignored him. "You should consider getting rid of him before he hurts you." It was then that Shadow, the black cat, who had been watching from the shadows, suddenly jumped on the table, knocking over the basket. Its contents spilled onto the floor. There was no bread or cakes, but gnawed bones and rotten meat. The sisters backed away in horror. The woman laughed, and her laugh transformed into a guttural and terrible sound. She removed the scarf covering her face, revealing the ogre's horrible face. "Stupid brats, now you're mine." The sisters screamed and ran to the bedroom, locking the door. The ogre couldn't enter, while Guardian lived, and could defend the house's threshold with his last breath, so it changed tactics. During the following days, the ogre adopted a different strategy. It no longer tried to enter by force. Instead, it returned each night disguised as Aunt Margarita and spoke with the sisters through the closed door, trying to win their trust again. It told them invented stories about their father, promised them help, offered them comfort, and most importantly, it continuously planted the idea that Guardian, wounded and weak as he was, represented a danger to them. "That dog could have rabies from infected wounds," it said in a honeyed voice. "It could bite you in your own house. I've seen cases like that before. Faithful animals that go mad from pain and attack those they love most. Wouldn't it be better to give it a merciful death before it suffers more?" Night after night, those poisonous words filtered into Catalina and Beatriz's ears. Guardian, indeed, wasn't improving. He moaned in pain constantly, his wounds oozed despite care, and he could barely get up to drink water. The older sisters began to tire of caring for him, of cleaning his bandages, of hearing his moans. Only Lucia remained firm in her devotion to the animal, spending hours beside him, caressing his fur, whispering words of encouragement. "Sisters, this can't continue," said Catalina one morning after another sleepless night due to the dog's moans. "The animal is suffering. Maybe that woman is right. Maybe we should end his suffering." Beatriz nodded, with tears in her eyes. "I can't stand seeing him like this. It's cruel to keep him alive in this state." Lucia looked at them in disbelief. "Have you gone mad? That woman is not our aunt. She's the monster that killed Grison and Carmelo. Don't you see it? She wants us to kill Guardian because he's the only thing stopping her from entering and devouring us." But her sisters no longer listened to the voice of reason. That night, when the disguised ogre returned, the older sisters made a terrible decision. Despite Lucia's pleas and screams, they dragged poor Guardian, too weak to resist, to the backyard. The dog looked at them with his brown eyes full of sadness and disappointment, but also of understanding. He knew what was about to happen. "I'm sorry, old friend," sobbed Catalina as she raised the axe they used to cut firewood. With one quick blow, it was all over. Guardian, the faithful protector who had given everything for them, lay motionless on the earth. Lucia fell to her knees crying inconsolably, while Catalina and Beatriz walked away with blood-stained hands, unable to look at what they had done. From the forest, hidden among the trees, the ogre watched with a triumphant smile. "Finally," it whispered. That same night, it didn't wait until later. As soon as darkness was complete, it approached the house. There was no longer any need for disguises or deceptions. The door that was previously protected by guardian spirit was now defenseless. The ogre struck it forcefully, making it tremble on its hinges. "Come out, girls. It's time we dined together." Its voice was a mixture of mockery and fierce hunger. The three sisters, terrified, ran to hide in different parts of the house. Catalina got under her bed, Beatriz inside the clothes wardrobe, and Lucia climbed to the attic by the ladder, hiding among old boxes and trunks. The ogre began to pound on the door harder, splintering the wood with each impact. Finally, the door gave way with a terrible crack, and the creature entered the house, sniffing the air. "I can smell you, girls. I can smell your fear. It's delicious." It searched each room methodically, enjoying the hunter's game. It found Beatriz first. Her screams were horrible but brief. Then it found Catalina. The girl begged for her life, promised anything, but the ogre showed no mercy. When it was time to look for Lucia, the ogre slowly climbed the stairs to the attic, savoring the moment. "Come out, little one," it called in an almost tender voice. "Your sisters no longer feel pain. I'll be quick with you too." Lucia, hidden behind an old trunk, trembled uncontrollably. She closed her eyes, waiting for the inevitable. But then, from below, from the yard where Guardian's lifeless body lay, a bark was heard. Weak at first, but then stronger. "My master entrusted me to protect them. As long as my spirit persists, you won't touch them." The ogre froze, turning its head grotesquely toward the window. Down there, in the yard illuminated by the moon, Guardian's translucent figure had risen. It wasn't the wounded and dying dog from before, but the magnificent mastiff in his best form, his eyes shining with a supernatural fire. The faithful dog's ghost began to bark with a strength that shook the house's foundations, a bark that seemed to come from the depths of the earth itself. The ogre, terrified for the first time in its long existence, ran down the stairs. The spirits of loyal animals were things that even ogres feared, for their devotion transcended death itself and could cause true harm to creatures of darkness. The ogre fled from the house, pursued by Guardian's ghost, who bit and tore at it with spectral teeth that could indeed wound it. The chase took them back into the forest, deeper and deeper, until they reached a steep ravine. The ogre, in its panic, didn't see the precipice and fell, rolling hundreds of meters until it crashed against the rocks at the bottom. Its body was destroyed, and its evil spirit finally dissipated into the night. Guardian, his mission fulfilled even after death, returned to the house. Lucia had come down from the attic and was in the yard, crying over the dog's cold body. The spirit approached her, and for a moment, the girl could see it clearly. Guardian licked her hand with his spectral tongue, one last show of affection, and then vanished into a soft golden light that rose toward the starry sky. Lucia remained there all night, alone, traumatized by everything she had witnessed, crying not only for the dog, but for her sisters, whose lives had been taken by their own foolishness and by the evil they had invited to enter. When dawn broke, Lucia wandered through the empty house like a ghost herself. She couldn't stay there, between those walls that now held such horrible memories. She went out to the main road and walked aimlessly until a merchant's carriage found her and took her to the nearest village. There, in the local priest's house, she waited for weeks until finally the news arrived that her father had returned from the capital, Esteban. When he finally arrived home and found the shattered door, the bloodstains, and no trace of his daughters except for some torn garments, fell to his knees howling in pain. The neighbors told him about the girl who had been found on the road, and he ran to the village to reunite with Lucia. He found her emaciated, with a lost look, aged beyond her years by the trauma. Between sobs, she told him the whole story. The incident with the cat, the ruined matches, the trip to the forest, the disguised ogre, the death of the animals, and finally, her sister's terrible decision to kill Guardian. The blacksmith cried bitterly, but also felt a spark of hope, knowing that Guardian's spirit had saved at least one of his daughters. Together with a group of men from the village, he returned to his house and followed the trail to the ravine where they found the ogre's remains. They also discovered the creature's cabin, and inside it, a considerable treasure that the monster had accumulated during decades of robbing travelers. Gold, jewels, precious objects of all kinds. According to the kingdom's law, that treasure now belonged to Esteban, as the ogre's victim. With that wealth, the blacksmith could have rebuilt his life, bought a new house, lived comfortably, but none of that mattered without his other two daughters. He then decided to use part of that gold to build a monument in the village cemetery in memory of Catalina and Beatrice, two sisters who had lost their lives for not listening to wisdom when it was offered to them. He also erected a stone statue of Guardian in the village center, so that everyone would remember the dog's unwavering loyalty, who had protected his mistresses even beyond death. The rest of the gold he donated to charitable works, orphanages and hospitals, feeling that wealth stained with his daughter's blood could never bring him happiness. He moved with Lucia to a smaller house in the village center, where she could be surrounded by people and never again feel alone or vulnerable. Over time, Esteban aged and withered, consumed by the pain and guilt of having left his daughters alone, even when he had tried to protect them in every way he knew. Lucia grew up under the weight of those memories. She never married, never had children of her own. Instead, she dedicated her life to caring for her father in his old age, and after he died, she became a kind of counselor in the village. People came to her seeking wisdom, and she always had the same story to tell, adapting it to each situation. She spoke to them about the importance of listening, especially to those who can see dangers that others don't perceive. She spoke to them about not being seduced by deceptive appearances or sweet promises when something inside screams warning. And above all, she spoke to them about loyalty, about how true protectors often come in forms we don't expect, and how despising or destroying that protection out of impatience or comfort can have devastating consequences. The black cat, Shadow, who had been indirectly responsible for starting the whole tragedy through his vengeful act of ruining the matches, disappeared the night the ogre was defeated. No one saw him again. Some said he had fled to the forest, consumed by guilt. Others claimed to have seen him in the shadows near the cemetery, as if mounting eternal guard over the graves that his wounded vanity had helped to fill. Lucia, in her later years, used to say that she had forgiven the cat, for she understood that all beings, human or animal, can make mistakes when they act from pain or wounded pride. The true lesson, she said, wasn't in blaming the cat, but in recognizing how small cruelties can unleash cascades of tragedies. When Lucia finally died, already an old woman, they buried her next to her father's grave, near the monument he had erected for her sisters. And legend tells that on certain full moon nights, when the wind blows from the forest toward the village, one can see the translucent figure of a large mastiff dog walking among the graves, still standing guard, faithful even in the afterlife. The The village children learned not to fear that apparition, but to greet it with respect. For Guardian never abandoned his duty to protect, and his spirit became the guardian not only of that family, but of all who lived in that place. The blacksmith's house, the one that was the scene of so much horror, was demolished by order of the new mayor, who considered that no building that had harbored such evil should remain standing. In its place they planted a garden of white roses, flowers that, according to local tradition, had the power to keep evil spirits away. And in the center of that garden, they placed a bronze plaque with an inscription that read, "Here lived 3 sisters. 2 lost their lives for not listening. 1 survived to tell their story." May those who read this learn, wisdom doesn't always come from the elders, and loyalty is the most sacred of gifts. Years passed and generations succeeded one another. The story of the 3 sisters and the forest ogre became a local legend that mothers told their children as a warning. But beyond being simply a terror tale, it became a parable about the consequences of our decisions, about the importance of loyalty, about listening to those who, though younger or apparently less experienced, can see truths that others overlook, and above all, about the danger of being carried away by immediate comfort or tempting promises when our deepest instincts warn us of danger. If you made it this far and want to keep discovering stories that leave you thinking, subscribe to the channel and share this tale with someone who needs to hear it.